Hello everyone and welcome, and thank you for joining today's Data Insights in ANZ Transactive Global Training webinar. My name is Natalie and I'm from the institutional banking team here in Australia. I'm joined by my colleague Shivang from our data team, and we are delighted to have you here as we explore how to make the most out of ANZ Transactive Global, our digital web and mobile banking platform. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Perth, land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I also extend my acknowledgement to the traditional owners on the lands of which you are joining us from. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Indigenous people joining us on the call today from the various regions. Our training webinars are designed to help you unlock the full potential and get the most out of our digital channel. Through a single interface, you can access commonly used services such as cash management, trade finance, loans, commercial cards, foreign exchange and data insights. Today's session will be presented by Shivang, our Data Insights product owner. Shivang will walk you through the Data Insights module within ANZ Transactive Global with a particular focus on economic pulse and customer analysis. He will demonstrate how spending data can be transformed into clear, actionable insights and how to use our customizable graphs, charts and maps to analyse retail spending trends. You will also see how to compare spending behaviours across states, regions and postcodes, also including e-commerce versus in-store and year-on-year trends. Following today's session, I would encourage you to view our ANZ Digital Services help pages for further information on the topics discussed, as well as revisiting our previous webinars, and I'll show you how to find these at the end of the session. While the Teams chat function is disabled, you can submit your questions via the Q&A tab at the top of the screen. My colleagues are online and will answer as many questions as possible as we go. Additionally, today's webinar is being recorded, and in the coming days, the video and a copy of the question and answers, including any questions we were unable to answer during the session, will be available in ANZ Digital Services Help, so you can rewatch or share with colleagues who couldn't join us live. And the last thing before we start, this session is being conducted using a training environment, which means that some of the screens and system behaviour may appear a little different to what you see in your live ANZ Transactive Global site. So please keep that in mind as we go. For anything outside of ANZ Transactive Global, we can show screens from ANZ Digital Services Help. And with that, I will now hand over to Shivang, who will take you through our webinar today. Thank you, Shivang.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen now.
It's perfect, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming for today's webinar. I figured that the best place to start would be on your dashboard. So today I'll give you a quick overview of Economic Pulse customer analysis, and I'll focus a little bit more on the kinds of insights you can get from the apps. So when you log on to Transactive, you can see the left bar over here. To access Economic Pulse, all you need to do is just click on this Data Insights tab there, and it should automatically take you there. Now, what is Economic Pulse? We developed this product when knowing that as a bank, we're really fortunate. We get to see how consumers interact with a range of different industries. And we wanted to be able to give our customers the same level of visibility so that you can make better strategic decisions. So Economic Pulse is the first module that helps with that. What we did here is we looked at all transactions made by an ANZ retail customer using a credit card or a debit card on any merchant terminal, as well as transactions made on an ANZ Worldline merchant terminal from any card. That allows us to essentially cast the net really wide. We take that information, de-identify it, and aggregate it up to get this view that you see here. What the app lets you do is it lets you compare spending trends this year across multiple years in the past. And you can look at different industries, different regions to find the regions and industries most relevant to your business. So let me switch to, say, the last 12 weeks over here. And what you're seeing here is the dark blue line represents spend this year. The light blue line is spend last year, and the bars represent the change. So we can see that based on this, the spend is slightly lower than what it was last year. But let's look at a category which most of you would have seen or felt yourselves. So let's go to petrol station spend. Now, as you can see, from around mid-February, spend actually started more so towards the end of February. Spend started rising, and this is actually a reflection of what we're all experiencing with the increasing petrol prices. And spend actually increases quite sharply when we compare against last year. Now, this stabilizes around the end of March, and you might remember that that's around the time that the government passed on the changes to the excise duty, hence giving consumers a bit of relief. So it's really interesting. You can see straight in the data, excuse me, that spend rose up, and when there was government policy kicked in, spend started declining. Even though in comparison to last year, it's still pretty high. Now, I've just shown petrol stations here as an example, but really, you can pick any industry here. It doesn't have to be the industry that you operate in. So let's go ahead and maybe look at shopping, and let's see department store spend, just as an example. So in department store spend, we see a very different story. Now, we don't see the same level of rise that we saw with petrol station spends, as you'd imagine. And what the app lets you do is you can drill down into different states, more specific industries, and you can look at that e-commerce versus in-store spend graph. Now, if I look over here, I can see in the week ending the 5th of May, spending in department stores was up just above 1.5% year on year. Now, if I go down here, you can see that that's actually driven more so because of a year-on-year increase in e-commerce spend as compared to in-store spend. So if you have your own e-commerce platforms, your own online stores, and your brick and mortar stores, you can actually use the data that we see on Economic Pulse almost as a benchmark to see if the trends you're seeing in your own data and your own sales matches what others in the industry are experiencing. Now, this was all at a national level. There's two reasons why we really love Economic Pulse. The first one being how recent and up-to-date the data is. So when we built this, we wanted to give a leading indicator to what's happening in the economy. And you can't do that with data that's four weeks old. And that's why we update the data every day. And the lag between when someone makes a transaction and when it appears on the dashboard is usually 2 to 3 days. And that's why right now we see data up to the 5th of May. So we're getting a really good, really fresh indicator here. The second reason why we really like it is the ability to customize and go down to specific regions as well. So let's look at the department store spend in Victoria. And you can actually see we've broken down department stores into another subcategory for discount stores. And we can see how that's behaving over time as well. Now, scrolling a little bit more, we actually look at the spend by regions as well. So here we can look at spend in the last 12 weeks, this year versus last year, broken down by SA3 region. And SA3 region is essentially just, it's a statistical area defined by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Usually it's a combination of a few postcodes. So if I say look at the Wyndham Council, I can see that department stores overall was up about 2.5%. Discount store spend, though, in this region was actually down by about just under 10%. So depending on the kind of brand, the brand you have, and depending on the kind of consumers you attract, you can actually overlay your own store network and see, well, if you have a store in this region and you're seeing your discount store, what does your spending trend look like relative to others in that region? Now, all of the widgets here, they're my customized view. That's how I like to see these widgets. But you can click on this button on the bottom right, and you can change the view to suit yourself so that the insights which you look at more regularly, you can choose to have them right on top. Now, this will still spend across all merchant terminals that we capture. Whenever we've shown this to some of our retailers, one of the first questions I almost always get is, what about me? What about my brand and my customers? And to help answer that, we've actually built customer analysis. So here what we do is we drop the acquiring side of the data and we only focus on transactions made by ANZ customers using a credit card, a debit card, or even through direct debit and BPay. We de-identify, aggregate the information up. But when we're grouping together this data, we actually group this in a manner that's relevant to your business. So say you are a department store operating in Victoria, or you run a brand of clothing. We can actually isolate transactions that go through your terminals, regardless of what terminals you use. That enables us to give you insights around three things. Who are my customers? Where do they come from? And how do they interact with my brand? That's what customer analysis helps with. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I'm looking at transactions made at a fictitious clothing brand that operates in Victoria. And the map you see here is a representation of the postcodes where this brand's customers actually come from. So you can see that there's a lot of customers in the western Melbourne, the Point Cook, Werribee, Tarneit region, and a bit more in the north around Craigieburn. But have a look at this. If I zoom back in towards the east of Melbourne, and I switch the metric here from unique customers to average customer spend, I can see that customers in the Toorak and the Brighton region spent a lot in the last 2 years in comparison to the surrounding regions. Now, depending on how comfortable you are, experienced you are with Melbourne's geography, this wouldn't be a surprise. But what we found really interesting is even though the outcome was similar, the driver for this was different. So if I swap from average customer spend to average transaction spend, that's looking at the average spend consumers make at every transaction, regardless of how many transactions they made. You can see that Toorak comes up. Toorak is the spend per transaction is a bit higher versus if I switch to, say, average customer frequency, Brighton lights up. So what's really insightful here is that from your sales data, or you might know that spend from Brighton and Toorak is high, but the driver for both of these is different. And so when you're approaching your next marketing campaign, the way you'd approach these regions would also be different. You'd either want to get your customers in Brighton to perhaps spend a little bit more per transaction, or you'd want to get those Toorak heavy hitters to come more often into your stores. These are the kinds of insights that you can get just out of the box from the app. Now, if I scroll down a little bit, we can start off by seeing just a few very high-level performance metrics. So number of customers actually spending with you, how they spend, so the average customer spend and the average transaction value. So we can see for this brand, we've got a bit of a peak around the November, both in 2025 and 2024. It does look like the difference between the Black Friday period and the Christmas period is actually reducing a little bit. Those peaks in number of customers actually follows the peak in customer spend as well, which is really interesting to see because a lot of brands that we work with, especially if you're running discounts, you'd expect there's an increase in number of customers, but often the average customer spend actually drops towards more of a holiday spend type. But if we go a little bit deeper, let's look at who's actually making these transactions. So over here, you can see a distribution of the age bands of your customers and the gender. So this will help you understand if when you're running your marketing campaigns, are you actually attracting the right people, the right kind of customers to your brand? What's the impact that those campaigns have actually had? And what are perhaps some regions and areas that you should be focusing on? Now, if you combine the demographic metrics with the spend metrics, you get some really interesting insights. So looking at the chart on the left here, I can see the average transaction spend for each age band. Now for this brand, you can see it's really similar. It's between the $110, $120 mark. And so this is more likely a reflection of the basket size for your stores, but also the type of product you offer, because of which your average across all age bands tends to be very similar. But what it does seem interesting here is the transaction frequency is more of a driver here. So we can see that on average, the 45 to 49-year-olds spend more often at this fictitious brand as compared to other age bands. Now, when I combine the average transaction spend and the average transaction frequency together, I actually get the average spend per customer. So it's as long as I'm using one of my ANZ cards, no matter how many transactions I make, being able to see for me what does my average spend look like. And then looking at all of the consumers who actually spend with your brand, you can see on average, because of the main driver being the frequency here, we can see the average customer spend for this 45 to 49-year-old age band is higher than the rest. Now, most of you would have heard of the 80-20 principle, the value you get from the small proportion of customers. To test that out, one of the features we've added on the app is actually called customer value segments. Essentially, what we're doing here is we want to help understand how big of an impact a small group of customers can have on your brand. And so we rank customers based on their total spend with you in this 2-year window. And we essentially sort them. So that bucket number 1 is the top spenders. And for this fictitious brand, you can see that they spent over $5,000 over a 2-year window at this fictitious brand. When I look at this graph, there's 2 things I look for. The first is this number, and more so the drop off between the top bucket and the second bucket. So you see here, the spend's about around $6.5K, but the next 10% is only about $2,000. So you can see a really big drop off as you go down the value segments. Now, we know that this top 10% contributes a lot of spend, and that's what this pie chart on the bottom right shows. It shows us that this small group of customers were responsible for over 55% of spend that we saw going through these terminals. And if I actually click on the second bucket, it's about 17. So we're sitting well and truly above the 70% mark that just the top 20% of customers have on this brand. When I've shown this to my customers, their first question I get is, if we know these are the top customers, who are they? How do we get more of them? And how do we expand this bucket number 2 as well? So that's where the graph on the right is for. So you can see the way to read this would be the horizontal lines represent the value segments, the columns represent the age bands, and the color represents the number of customers, or the proportion of customers. So that 45 to 50-year-old age band we said was really important. Yeah, we can see that in this top bracket over here. Now, all of the insights I've talked through so far, they're across all of Australia, across your entire brand. We note that you might want to actually look at very specific regions. And so what you can do is if you just click somewhere on the map, you can set up your own catchment area. So let's go here. Maybe let's look at the Brighton and the Toorak region again. Let's go here. Let's make this catchment a bit smaller. There we go. So now I'll click on that to hide that. There we go. So now every chart, every insight we've seen so far, you can actually explore more deeply just for the postcodes that you've selected here. And using the catchment radius, you can select multiple postcodes. So seeing this, I can see that 3186 is Brighton. So I can see that both Brighton and Toorak follow a similar trend, but there's more customers for this brand who come from Brighton. And what I see here about average customer spend, our friends in Toorak are actually spending more throughout the year on average compared to the customers in Brighton. Now, we recognize that these insights, they're really interesting if you're in like a treasury and finance department, but it's probably a really good fit for your marketing teams, your strategy teams, your network planning teams. And so we wanted to make sure that we're enabling a way for your users from other parts of your organization to also get access to this. And so the way we've set this up is you can grant access to just these data insights features. So I don't need to have access to payments or accounts or anything just to be able to see this. And what I'll do, I'll give you a quick overview of how you can do that. So from the main panel, we'll just go to administration. And for now, I'll just click on the create user button. I'll fill in the details here. And to grant someone access, just go add permissions, strategic insights here. Now we can choose which division to give. Let's just go all divisions for now. And you can actually choose if someone has access to say just economic pulse or just customer analysis. So let's do that for now. All right, let's click save there. And when I fill in the rest of the details and click submit, depending on your administration model, another admin can approve access. Both economic pulse and customer analysis are value add services. And that means you can get as many users as you want set up on this. They can access it as often as they like. But the key thing is we've set this up in a way that you can make it really easily get access to insights beyond traditional banking and finance insights so that you can make better strategic data-driven decisions. And with that, I'll hand back to Natalie.
Thank you, Shivang. That was a very interesting and insightful webinar today. So this brings us to the end of our Data Insights in ANZ Transactive Global training webinar. On the screen I'm about to display is our list of upcoming webinars, together with a QR code to register for these events. And I would like to highlight in particular 2 webinars scheduled for next week for our File Active and ANZ Transactive Global customers around preparing for the ISO 20022 changes that are coming in November this year. A reminder that a recording of this session, as well as the question and answers, will be added to ANZ Digital Services Help in the coming days, should you wish to revisit or share with a colleague. And you can get to ANZ Digital Services Help by scanning this QR code currently on the screen, or by clicking the help icon next time you're signed into ANZ Transactive Global. So I hope this session has been of value, and we look forward to you attending our future ANZ Transactive Global training webinars. Thank you.